Okay. Hi, everyone. I think live. Uh, I ran the beginning of this tape while I was fiddling with something. So if it was blank for a while, don't worry. I guess or maybe I'll stick that on the announcements. So let's set the table here. I'm going to be lecturing on The Last Laugh, the silent movie. You have the YouTube link to a good copy. I also sent you stills from the movie, um, and when you're listening to this lecture, and in a minute I'll invite you to pause so that you can, if you can, pull up those stills because I've got the stills here. I haven't really figured out how to share them. It seems awkward, and I don't want to screw up the recording. So uh, I'll be looking at the stills. I'll describe them, but if you want to really follow along, two ways to follow along. One would be to have the YouTube video, and just every now and then when I'm talking about a scene, you can run the scene if you want, or you can watch the movie again when I'm done talking, anything you want to do. But basically this lecture has three sources. There's me talking to you now on this tape. There's me on this tape referring to stills where I've also written my notes. And then there's the movie itself. So there's no set rule of what's best. You can pause me, watch the movie, pause the movie, watch me, pause the movie and me, and spend some time with the stills. Just mix and match among those three. The advantage of a still shot is it allows you to see how the director, Murnau in this case, Murneau, how he's framed the shot. The disadvantage of the still, obviously, is it's still. It's not moving. So in cinema studies, it's productive to go from stills to clips. Because if you only do clips, things go by fast, and although the clips produce an effect, it's harder to analyze and study how that effect was achieved. So film is really cinema, and now social media and video is the dominant art form of our time. It's also one of the dominant forms of expression. And so painting and literature has been around for centuries. Cinema began in 1895, more or less, at least as the beginnings of an entertainment model. And it was initially just a novelty. The very first movie, and you can find it on YouTube, I might even post it, is Train Entering the Station by the Lumiere brothers. It's about 50 seconds long, and it's just a regular train, regular scheduled train. There's no actors or anything. It just pulls in and doors open and people walk out and walk past the camera, which they don't really take any notice of. And that was it. And it was a very popular movie. It was, and because you get to see the train coming around the corner, and there's anecdotal stories that people were actually made them nervous to have the train come toward them, so to speak, even though they knew they were in a cinema and these were just shadows on a screen. But it did show how the suspension of disbelief that, I'm watching a train, not shadows, really worked, because they didn't know. They thought people would say, this is silly, I'm just watching light and shadows getting splashed all over the screen. But people immersed themselves quite readily. And then in the Lumiere brothers, there were other movies, but this one sort of caught the eye of people. And I think it's because of the way the Lumiere brothers found an angle where the train comes in and comes around and it stops. And the angle is such that the people get out and then they come toward the camera and then they go past the camera. So it's really a voyeur's view. It doesn't feel like a newsreel where you're just being shown something from a distance. So it seems personal and looking at people, and it does provoke the voyeur in all of us, that's the safety of watching and looking as you wish in the dark. Not to say it's perverse or some kind of peeping Tom thing, although that also will get used a little bit, but voyeur in the fullest sense of the word, the safety of watching others when you yourself are not being watched. Because if there's a close-up, there's a famous close-up, Thomas Edison, where, no, it was the Great Train Robbery, 1909, where the bad guy turns with a gun and fires it right into the audience. And that also startled people, not least of all because it broke what's called the fourth wall. You know, you have the three walls when you're watching a scene in a room. And if an actor turns out, looks into the camera and says, "What do you think?" It breaks. It also breaks the suspension of disbelief. You don't believe you're in a bar somewhere anymore watching two people have a conversation. You're suddenly like, oh, yeah, I'm watching a movie and there's a camera and this guy's talking to the camera. So usually the fourth wall is not broken, but there are ways of making you feel suspense, making you feel watched in a way. Hitchcock was a master at this, and what he liked to work with the differential between what the character on screen knows and what you know. And most of the time with Hitchcock, you know a bit more than the character, so you can see dangers that they don't. Famous example in Psycho, where one of the sister trying to find out what happened to her sister has gone into the old house thinking that the only person there is an old lady, really super old lady, but it's actually a serial killer who dresses up as his mother as part of his psychosis, and that he actually has killed her sister and might well kill her too. So she's not that worried. We're terrified, and in the audience, we're like, and there's stories of people shouting at the screen like, "Don't go in there! Don't go in there!" And we're terrified of what's going to come lurching around the corner. So that's an example where you feel what the word we use is sutured. You know, when you get a cut on your finger that goes a bit deep and you need a couple stitches, that's called suturing. So think of the screen as one part of your cut and you as the other part of your cut. And if it's too deep, then you need to take stitches and bring the two pieces of skin together so they can heal. So the way that works in movies, you know, the movie actually happens between the screen and you. I mean, something happens on screen, something happens in you, and the sum total of that, which is greater than the sum of its parts, happens in between the screen and you. So obviously a movie that's simply screened and no one's there on a certain level doesn't happen. And if you're just there looking at a blank screen, nothing happens. You stay with your own thoughts. But when you watch a movie, the movie affects you, and then the way that it affects you further affects how you watch the movie. So that's why directors are so important, and why great directors are sought after. Their works are sought after, and because they know how to use that space so well. And then in that sense, they're like, it's like poetry. Think of the images as words, and think of one image next to another image as provoking a metaphor. So if Yeats says, "What rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born," that image of a beast slouching and so on is evoked. And it's not in any single word that Yeats used. It's a sum total of words. He uses the word rough, and he uses the word beast, and he uses the word slouched. And all of them are important. Each word adds to the vividness and the tonality of the image. And so great directors are like that too. What you want to ask yourself when you're analyzing is always, images are like word choice. A shot is a word choice. So a close-up is like a word choice. Why did the director do a close-up? Why didn't he shoot it from far away? Or reverse the question, why did he shoot it? Why did he shoot it far away? And why not a close-up? And roughly speaking, certainly at the time, The Last Laugh was groundbreaking in that it used one title card. It's an hour and 20 minutes, I think. And title cards, these are silent movies, obviously, so don't turn up the sound, okay? You're not going to hear them. And title cards were used, but they can be somewhat effective, but they're usually also a little intrusive. Like the directors don't love cutting to a title card where the woman says, "How dare you presume I'm a married woman," let's say, and that's the scene, but they have to cut to the title card so that you know what she's saying, and as opposed to, you know, "My husband is not home, why don't you come in?" It would be very different title cards. And in a lot of the movies, you kind of tell, not so much even lip reading, although once in a while you can tell if they're shouting something. But you could probably tell whether a married woman is inviting a lover into the bedroom or is outraged that a man thinks he has the right to enter when she's a married woman. So two completely different scenes, and the body language will convey that. So you try and keep title cards to a minimum. But what Murnau did is he made the camera mobile. He was the first one to, and the cameras were pretty heavy. They were very heavy in 1895. This is 1925. And in those 30 years, some new cameras, they're still quite heavy. Like it'd be hard for a single person to pick up even the smaller cameras. But Murnau did things like he put it on a dolly. And these are, now we call them zoom shots because it's done with lenses. You just turn the lens and then come in on a close-up. But they had to literally push the camera forward into the face of the actor to get a close-up. They couldn't do it with lenses. So they literally called it a dolly shot because they had it on, the camera was on a dolly. And sometimes they call it a tracking shot because they actually use tracks, like what we have on Spadina with the trolleys, where they could roll the camera forward. And this film had become more sensitive to the light, so they were increasingly able to go into the studio, and it wasn't just only available light that they could use. And we saw that with Dr. Caligari. That was done entirely in the studio. Last Laugh is a combination. There's some indoor shots that are studio, and then there's lots of shots of the city. And there's still that sense of found footage in a way. Like there's a lot of shots of the city where clearly not everybody in that shot is aware that this is a movie or that they're being filmed. It's a busy intersection, and people are crossing and cars are going by. They're not all extras. They're not that's not all designed. And then the actor will wander out. And there may be some extras in some scenes. I mean, the people who live in the village are acting in that scene. So there's, let me set it up a little bit more. Why are movies such a dominant form? And when I say movies in cinema, I know that nowadays there's streaming, and movies are so available you can watch them on your phone. Although it's not, I don't think it's as fun. We have such a tiny screen. I think the big screen definitely makes a difference, and a lot of great directors are very aware that this is a big screen. So it's their canvas. And certainly, especially with older movies, or like say a Kubrick's 2001 or The Shining, for that matter, anything by Kubrick, Clockwork Orange, you don't get the full experience unless you're in full-on scene. And also the Dolby sound. I mean, sound's getting better, and home theaters are getting better. So we're getting close to duplicating something like the cinematic experience. And I'm old enough to really love movie theaters and the whole thing of going to the movies and getting popcorn, and whether it's with my wife of 20 years or what I can remember of dates, or even going with my buddies after a track meet. We would eat pizza, soda, and go watch the movie houses back then. They only had one film. They weren't multiplexes. So sometimes it got a little tedious because they kept the Sound of Music there for like a year until we were like, change the damn movie. And so there wasn't as many movies. Now there's 5,000 channels, and each one of them has 5,000 things. And 70% of it is not great. 20% is good, 5% is great, something like that. But so you're surrounded by all this, but you have to appreciate that in seeing The Last Laugh, you would go into a single movie house. There'd be a projector in the back, there'd be a beam of light shining that you could see, and then if you were to turn your head, and then there'd be the screen. I think they used to allow smoking in movie theaters, not in my time, but in the early days. So sometimes if you look back, you could see the smoke going up through the beam of light. So there was a whole atmosphere. And you were in the dark other than whoever you came with, you were in the dark with complete strangers who just happened to get a ticket. So there was a strange it wasn't totally, it's not totally unlike a church in the sense that you don't necessarily know everyone in your church or your congregation or your temple or mosque, but you don't need to. I mean, you still feel collective, even if you've never seen them before, because you're in the mosque, they're in the mosque, or the church, and so right, you have that in common, and it's easier. You can strike a conversation after a mass or a ritual without so much trepidation, because if nothing else, you're all there to worship or to perform, a ritual, not an addiction, but a ritual that's trying to help you see how you're doing in your own life and in the lives of those people you care about, and they're doing the same thing. So it's not quite the same in the movies, but I think movies, and they were built like almost churches. If you look at, you wouldn't know that now. I mean, cineplexes now half the time now look like gigantic trailer houses. Some of the better ones have a little mystique, and there's a couple old ones still. There's one on Bloor that shows documentaries a lot that give you just a vague idea. One on Queen Street, sort of Queen and Pate, a little further east. They're pretty cool. That one's a little run down. If I had some money, I would help them refurbish it. I mean, I have some money, but I don't know. I have enough for that. And movie theaters, the COVID is just may give them a bit of a death blow, I'm afraid, as far as, because even the studios are trying to figure out ways to deliver. I guess Mulan is already, the live action Mulan seemed pretty expensive. They streamed it. It's never been in the theater. It would have been still. The blockbusters still pull people into the theater. The superhero movies, especially, where the sound actually is a huge part of it. The sound effects and the spectacle, very spectacular. But whether the stories stick with you or not, the imagery is. And I'm going to be talking about the spectacle, because a spectacle is different than an image, even though a spectacle is an image. A spectacle is using imagery to promote a sense of transcendence. This is where movies are going to be important, because the whole class we've been talking about the loss of transcendental certitude. Cinema is not going to restore transcendental certitude, but it can evoke a feeling of transcendence, that in the sense of being carried away by the movie. So you cry, you scream, or you feel, you really hate a character, or you really love a character, or you hope for the best for a character, or you want to see a character get what they deserve because they've been bad to other people. All those things mimic transcendence for the 2 hours of the movie, or the hour and a half of the movie. That immersion, it feels like a transcendence, and it doesn't last beyond the movie, really. Although it can a little, just in the sense of, wow, I love that movie. That was a great movie. You take it into your day or even your week, and maybe you see the people you saw it with, or even just see other people who happen to see it. Like, wasn't that amazing? I love that scene where such and such happened, and I don't know how they did that, but that incredible, they jumped from one building to another, or that moment when she found the letter and realized that she'd been a lie all along. These are transcendent moments. They're not religious, and they're not, strictly speaking, spiritual, but think of cinema as an affect machine. It's a very strange art form because it requires a machine. Painting doesn't require a machine. I mean, you can type your novel on Microsoft, but you can also use a pencil, as many people did before. So, and of course, graphic art is a thing now. So you can use machines to do art. You can use machines to help you type your novel. There's graphic novels, which is some combination, but the machine isn't central to the aesthetic, to the way that the art form is delivered. Without a movie, without some kind of machine, there's no movie. And we've gone from movie projectors to DVDs. Many of the projectors in regular cinemas now are digital, so they're not, strictly speaking, projectors anymore, but it's still machinery, and you still need some kind of light source to shine through, either whether it's pixels or light coming through film that's been exposed. And of course, there were no, in the silent movies went up to about 1929, and then they slowly started to switch over into sound. 1930, 1931. It was a little creaky for a while, and the theaters had to retrofit because they weren't set up for everything. Had to change. It was quite a, even the way they filmed, they had to have, suddenly you have to have microphones. And if you've seen Singing in the Rain, it's a 1950s in Technicolor musical about the early days of cinema, which is, I mean, it's done for fun and with songs, but you'll get a sense of how the studios were in a little bit of an uproar. And many of the top silent stars either barely spoke English or spoke it with a heavy accent. And most of them were unable to translate into sound because no one wanted to hear a thick Russian accent or German accent. They just lost work. They had got, you know, they were very expressive, and the silent film stars are very good with expression. And there's a famous movie called Sunset Boulevard, directed by Billy Wilder from 1950, about an aging silent movie star who's kind of crazy. And I won't do any spoilers because it's a great, I'll try not to do a spoiler. It's a really good movie if you ever get a chance. But the scene, there's one scene in particular where she's gotten a little crazy and she can't, you know, she lost her career years ago, and she's trying to plan a comeback, and it's all in her head. It's pretty delusional. But the screenwriter is playing along because she has a lot of money and pays him a lot. He doesn't think he has no delusions that this movie will ever go anywhere. But meanwhile, he's getting paid. So, but there's just a scene where she likes to project. She has a cinema theater in her house, and she likes to project her own old movies. And there's a scene where there's a close-up, and Gloria Swanson, who was a silent movie star, she stars in Sunset Boulevard as the crazy former silent movie star. And she wasn't crazy, but she was, in fact. So they actually have her in what was a silent movie from the 20s. And there's a beautiful close-up, and she said, "Look at that. We didn't need sound. We had faces." And it's a great remark. She's like, we told the story with our face. And there's a real myth out there that you know, immediately as soon as cinema had sound, any movie with sound was better than every movie ever made that's silent. And that's so untrue. And I hope you can appreciate that with The Last Laugh, which is it can hold its own with any movie in the last 100 years. Because one of the advantages of silent movies, and this may have helped cinema develop as an art form, is you had to tell the story with images, or try to, as much as possible. So the old edict of don't tell, show was crucial in silent movies, because no one wants to go watch title cards, you know, one after another telling a story. You could just read that. You know, there's no fun in that. So The Last Laugh was the first movie to tell the entire story with cuts, edits, close-ups. And they put the camera in a bicycle at one point in the scene where the doorman is drunk and everything is kind of swirling around. There's literally a man riding a bicycle around in a circle with the camera in the basket. So, and you had to be incredibly inventive because they didn't have the kind of lenses they would have now. So you couldn't zoom, and they didn't have special effects the way we understand them in the studio. They didn't have green shots, you know, none of that sort of thing that Star Wars took such advantage of with all the lightsaber fights and things like that. They really didn't have that. They learned to cut film and splice it together again so they could make people appear and disappear, and things like that. But some of the camera shots in The Last Laugh were and really still are kind of extraordinary. And also the way Murnau puts together his tracking shots. Often his tracking shots are, because a tracking shot is one where the camera is following someone while they're walking down the sidewalk. A zoom or dolly shot is where the camera goes straight into the close-up. A pull-away shot is where it starts in close-up and pulls slowly back to show you more and more. This can be used in suspense too, because in horror movies, you know, you can pull back the camera, and at a certain point, you can see that the killer is hiding behind the drapes, and you didn't know that either because the camera was in the guy's face, and so now you're terrified because now you know where the killer is, and this guy doesn't. but a moment ago you didn't either. And we all know about pop-out scenes in horror movies, which are typically seen as a little bit low rent and too easy. Everyone startled if something just jumps into screen. But it does show how the screen itself, what's on screen, what's off screen, is always operative. And you remember in Dubliners, I was telling you how much James Joyce, likes to use this sense of a present absence, and like in The Sisters, what's wrong with Father Flynn? And cinema can't help but do that all the time. So cinema and Joyce learned, I think, a bit from cinema. But no matter what you're looking at in cinema, you're not seeing everything. And it's what I call imaginary plenitude. So we in a movie, you get immersed in it and you start to feel like that you're the voyeur and you're seeing all that there is to see. But that's not an imaginary plenitude. So it feels reassuring, like you're in charge. You're sitting in the dark, and you kind of think that the director's choices are your choices. Like you decided to take a close look at this guy's face, and you decided to pull out and see the whole city. And I mean, you didn't actually, but you trust the director on a certain level that the next cut he did is the cut that you would have done or need to do, and there's some truth to that. But again, it's choice. So in addition to asking why a close-up, why a tracking shot, also ask yourself what's on screen, what's not, what enters the screen, what leaves the screen. And then another common technique that Griffith developed, American director, that's used all the time, is called parallel editing. And that's quite simply where you show a house that's burning and a woman who's caught in the upstairs, and then you show a fire station with the men jumping onto the truck, and then you go back, cut to the house, cut to the fire truck. Now the fire truck's on the road. Cut to the house, cut to the fire truck. Will it get there in time? Will it get there in time? And that's suspense. And we understand that both things are happening simultaneously. We understand that every time we're watching the fire truck race toward the house is still burning. And every time we're watching the house burn, we know the fire truck is still racing toward the house. So we've got a double consciousness. Otherwise, it wouldn't work. We'd just be like, oh my God, I don't want to watch a woman burn to death. I'm out of here. Or why am I watching a stupid truck drive down the road all day? So the parallel editing creates a third feeling that's not in either shot. Like a fire truck just going down the road isn't that all that suspenseful. A house burning is dreadful, but not necessarily suspenseful if you don't know that a fire truck may or may not get there in time. And typically they would, because movies were trying to be entertaining. Prohibition actually helped cinema in America because all the bars closed down because liquor was illegal, and a bar was not too hard to retrofit into a movie studio because they were long, and so they would make a small theater. They would buy the bar for next to nothing because the liquor's all gone underground into speakeasies, and then they'd have a little theater, 20, 30 people, and they could still make $1. It kind of reminds me of the way people are scrambling right now because we don't have prohibition, we have COVID, and so restaurant takeout places are trying to figure out how can they convert more to takeover. We've got another lockdown. Sorry, guys, let's get through this together. 28 days. I have a feeling it's probably good for us, but it's like the worst vegetables ever. Like horrible broccoli. Like nobody wants to eat it. I don't want to eat it, but I don't want COVID to just rage on and on forever. So maybe we should. But I've been doing more takeout. I've been trying to support. I live near the Danforth, which is a nice area and has a lot of family-owned things, and that's hard. I'm not so worried about Tim Hortons, although even there, the franchises are often locally owned, so real people have their livelihoods, even though it's a big corporation. They have a little more leeway because Tim Hortons has enough money to keep paying rent as a corporation, whereas a fully family-owned business, then they have to come to terms with the landlord. And hopefully the landlords will understand that they can't expect the same rent return right now. So if everybody tries to look out for people and not just say, I don't care, COVID or no COVID, then then the business will have to leave because it can't pay that rent with no business. Anyway, sorry for that aside, but I like to keep things topical and remind you that 1900 and 2020 aren't, just on different planets. That was the point of that extra credit, which I'm enjoying reading, by the way. And I am putting comments on it when I can, and on that extra credit of watching the movie Blood in the Mobile. And I'd urge you to read the comments. Certainly, obviously, if it's your comment, well, because I'll tell you what I'm doing mostly is I'm taking the best sentence or two out of what you wrote, and then in the reply, I'm posting your sentence and then making a brief note. And what I'm really saying is this could help you study for the final, whether you wrote it or not. When you're reading what I pasted into the reply, you're reading what I think is a strong sentence or two. And then usually I try in my comment to indicate why I liked the connection that the writer made. So it's kind of a workshop for a good answer to the final. Not so much the journal, but definitely the final. So I'd encourage you to read through some of them. And even if you don't read the entire student reply for whatever reason, go down to the reply, and I will have pulled out a sentence I like and made a comment. So I think it's worth your time. It's just fun. It's just browse, and whether you post or not, it still could help you. And I think watching Blood in the Mobile would help you too. See the topicality of Heart of Darkness and mining for cobalt in the Congo, shockingly similar, with some interesting differences, which some of you guys are pointing out too. And that's the whole point of the final, is what's similar about these quotes and how is their emphasis different. So look, thinking of Heart of Darkness and Blood in the Mobile, obviously they're incredibly different and they're remarkably similar. And exploring that is exactly the dynamic that you bring to bear on the final exam. Okay. So what I'm going to do, I put up a file, and I'm looking at it right now, but I don't know how to share the screen. So if you want, you can have it on hand, and you can always pause me and look at it and come back to me. The first still I put on this is a still of the suitcase in the rain. So the first scene is about 10 minutes long, or maybe, and it's a very busy hotel called the Atlantic. It has a revolving door, which becomes a tremendous metaphor, and a lot of that is in my notes. But revolving door is a modern invention. Doors used to open in and out. So the fact of the revolving door is showing us how modernity is accelerating. More people can get in and out of that hotel and in and out of department stores. So hotels and department stores and are the biggest venues that would use revolving doors, and they still do if you go downtown here. And it's just an interesting metaphor because people are coming in to buy and they're leaving with what they bought, and it's accelerating consumption. So it's a great metaphor that Renault makes a huge bit. One of the special effects later is that when the doorman's drunk, there's you're seeing inside his mind, and then there's just a revolving door, and he's standing. But the first scene it sets up the rest of the movie because probably the first sort of three scenes. But in scene one, we see that the doorman is put in a position where he's going to lose his job. And that he loves his uniform, and it's very grand. In scene two, we see how much the villagers where he lives worship the uniform, and they wait for him. And he's a spectacle. This is how a spectacle works. It seems to unify. Like, we have this hotel, it's super busy, and the doorman is actually, ornamentally speaking, the doorman is important and the uniform is pretty almost gaudy, but it stands for the hotel. So if the hotel is confusing, the doorman isn't. That's kind of it's supposed to work. Who needs a doorman with a revolving door? That he's already excessive. And there's a boy who just his job all day long is just pull on the bar so that the guests can go out even more easily, and he looks like a machine. So it's interesting how the machines make the workers mechanical. The doorman, though, is ornamental. He's not supposed to. He doesn't even. He's not working the door. There is no. The kid is, and anyway, it's a revolving door. So he's supposed to. He blows his whistle a lot. He's like a traffic cop. And the implication is that if it comes to that, and it's very busy and it's rainy, then he can grab a bag too. And what's interesting is he's clearly older, and he knows it. That's what's so interesting. With the still in that I have in this thing I posted for you is you have this giant suitcase, close up of a giant suitcase on top of the car, and Murnau has lit it from above so that it glows, but it kind of makes it look sinister. So it doesn't look like a holy object. It looks like something dangerous, and it is because he's too old to really move a suitcase like that, and clearly he's been able to avoid trying. Like typically, the younger people are doing it, and so nobody would really notice. And you can see that he's very reluctant to even go attempt the suitcase. He blows his whistle, and then he looks frantically left and right, and he blows it, and blows it, and he blows the whistle, and the guy on top of the car is like, let's go. I mean, it's pouring rain. I'm a taxi. I gotta get out of here. So he finally feels like he has no choice. So he does it, and he even does manage it, and he staggers into the hotel with this gigantic suitcase on his back. But it's exhausting, and he actually looks like he even hurt himself a little, like pulled a small muscle. So he's not thinking a whole lot about it. He collapses in a chair to catch his breath. But then we see the kind of cold efficiency of bureaucracy, because there's a manager, and he helps somebody out, and he looks around, he can't find the doorman, and so that's a problem. The hotel has to have a doorman in front of it. He looks around for the doorman, and when he sees the doorman kind of in the chair trying to recover, he takes out the pad and the pencil, and he starts writing in it. And meanwhile, the boy has brought him a glass of water or something. And there's a deliberate contrast between the managers, who basically now is seeing this doorman as a faulty socket or a light bulb that's dimming. And what do you do with that when a light bulb starts blinking and then is about to burn out? You unscrew the light bulb, you throw it out, and you screw in a new light bulb. And I think I've said this in other lectures. That's one of the problems with the 21st century, is with the increase of the PEPSI myths, particularly the myth of efficiency. People are disposable because it's more efficient to just get rid of the older guy and get a new guy. And this is 1925. This is the Weimar Republic. It's this Germany in between the two wars. Hitler is in jail right now, writing Mein Kampf. He got arrested for an attempted coup. Mein Kampf is going to become a bestseller. Hitler's going to become a dictator. World War II will break out in 1939. So that's 14 years from now. This is the same. 1925 is when Mrs. Dalloway is set, but that was in London. They won the First World War. This is in Berlin, or I don't think they identify it as Berlin, but it is. And things are not the same. Germany had runaway inflation. Even though you see wealthy people here, these are 1%ers, maybe even 0.5%ers. There was a very, very thin layer of wealth. And then kind of crushing. There was virtually no middle class because the inflation. They kept printing money to try and deal with having to pay war reparations to everybody they lost to. And after a while, you literally needed a suitcase of cash to do any kind of grocery shopping. And so then there was a black market. It was really a mess, and the place was rife for somebody to come in like Hitler, blame the Jews for the economy, insisted we really hadn't lost the war, just like Trump says he hasn't lost the election. And that gave people pride again, that kind of denial. I mean, obviously there's no recount about whether Germany lost the war or not, like what we're going through right now, or what the U.S. is. But he said that we were sold out, that the army wasn't in that bad a shape. It could have fought on, but the Jewish industrialists, financiers, had made enough money, and this was the story. In fact, the German army was depleted, and when the U.S. entered the war with 3 million people 3 million soldiers. They couldn't hold up. England and France were able to regroup, and so they just surrendered in the trenches, and everybody slogged back home. So that's the atmosphere behind this movie, and so partly we're seeing why fascism is. And Murnau couldn't have predicted Hitler, really, although he would have read about Hitler because he just had a trial where he was put in jail, and the doorman's not a fascist. What's interesting is how people are desperate for a feeling of transcendence, to find something above them, something other. The religion is still in retreat, and so the uniform is sacred. It's like a chalice or something, and that's also why they'll be so brutal to him when he gets fired, gets replaced by a younger man. They take his uniform, they give him a job in the basement washroom, and the villagers really turn on him because he steals his uniform, and so he can go back home in hopes that nobody will notice that, or nobody will know he doesn't actually work as a doorman anymore. He can just appear as a doorman, which is kind of how propaganda works. It persuades you that something is substantial when in fact it's just a spectacle. We've seen a lot of spectacle in politics. Speeches at Mount Rushmore and at the Lincoln Memorial, and the spectacle is impressive, but the substance is pretty much absent. So much, and that's the power of spectacle, is it feels important, even when there's nothing there that's particularly valuable. Even the halftime ceremony. Now, sometimes those musicians are quite talented, obviously Springsteen or Beyonce, but it's a tremendous amount of spectacle, and it lasts only like 20 minutes, and it's a marvel of machinery that they're able to get Beyonce out there, and she can dance and have her stage, and then it's all gone again, so they can play the second half of the football game. And I think part of the spectacle is the apparatus. It's just kind of, I mean, Beyonce is great, obviously, but just watching them put together everything that she needs to bring her spectacle. And I don't mean that people who do spectacle are out of talent, because she does, and so directors, but with politicians often, and Hitler was good at staging spectacles, the Nuremberg trials, and so not the trials, that was after the war. The Nuremberg rallies and the Trump rallies are high spectacle, where they're kind of the emotion is not based in policy discussion, and that's an easier thing to get caught up in. And simple things like lock her up or lock him up and drain the swamp, reducing things to slogans. Heil Hitler, obviously, Sieg Heil was, and putting the hand up like that in unison. That was spectacle. And doing things in unison looks efficient, and efficiency looks powerful and strong, but it breeds a contempt for the weak, quote unquote. Because here's a doorman, there's no retirement party, there's no pension, there's no health plan that I can see. He's not so different than those, well, he's quite different actually, but Marlowe noticed that the slaves, not the slaves, but the natives in the Congo were replaceable. It's easier to work them to death than take any care of their health, because there was enough of them. So they were just thrown out like burned out light bulbs. And to a degree, the doorman is also disposed of, worked until he can't work, and then thrown down into the washroom, which they present to him as a big favor. Like, because you worked here so many years, we're going to let you clean the bathroom in the basement. That's his, retirement plan. I'm hoping for a better retirement plan. I think I've got one. I'll clean my own bathroom, but UT has a pension. I've been paying into it for 27 years or something like that. So when this old doorman can't pull the suitcase off of the car anymore, whatever the equivalent of that is, I'm not going to be banished to some, job out of sight. and then there's OHIP and so on. So I'll be fine. But that's not. This is a very precarious economy, and still is. And I'm lucky. I mean, I have a lot more security than lots of people in this economy. Especially, and again, especially in the U.S. No national health care. There's not much of a safety net. There's better safety net in Canada. I've lived in both countries. Lived in the U.S. for my first 30 years, and here my subsequent 30 years. So I've gotten, I know both cultures, and I'm a dual citizen too. Lately, identifying a little more as Canadian than American, though maybe I'll soften that if Biden's going to win. I'm hoping that he gets the Senate so he can actually do more and get this damn vaccine out. But anyway, so Murnau sets this up. And this is where cinema can be kind of powerful, because even before you know what's going to happen, there's something about the way he shoots this suitcase that draws your eye to it. It makes you kind of nervous. Like, why? And this gets to choice. Why does Murnau spend so long and a close up? And why is this suitcase literally glowing? And that wasn't just, I don't know, I guess the light. I mean, he had spotlights that were hung above it that are not on. It took a lot of time. He had a crane. So he worked for this shot. And the weird thing about cinema is it tends to hide the apparatus so that you can stay immersed. So you're not going to show the crane and show the light shining on the suitcase. Sometimes avant-garde directors like to show the apparatus. They make movies about movies. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get to Charlie Chaplin and modern times. Movies are also, I've told you that the great myth of modernity is that it's a time without myths, and then I gave you the PEPSI myths. And cinema is our most mythic art form right now, because images and religions have done this for a long time. I can't speak for all religions with much clarity, but certainly Catholicism, which I grew up in, and Christianity generally, the stained glass window is like a still from a movie. And in the church I went to as a child, there's something called the 12 Stations of the Cross, which is when Jesus was crucified. He was given a heavy wooden cross that he himself had to carry all the way to the top of Calvary Hill, where he would be crucified with two thieves that happened to get caught up at the same time. And there are 12 moments. Like there's a moment where a woman steps forward and wipes the sweat from his brow, and that's one station at the cross. And then there are prayers to go with each station. So from the beginning to the top of the hill till when he finally says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Into your spirit, into your hands, I commend my spirit." These are the last words of Christ, and then the presumably mortal part of Christ dies, and 3 days later, according to Easter and ritual, he's resurrected and ascends into heaven. Now that's one religion. So, but as a kid, there were 12 stained glass windows in the church, and they went all the way around the church, and each one depicted one of the 12 stations of the cross. So that theoretically, if I turned my head quickly, I was watching a movie. And so the religion, certainly the religion I grew up in, and a lot of others, they use images a lot, and they like to use imagery. Painting, if you go to the Renaissance, it's like all they ever painted was Mary, Virgin Mary, and the baby Jesus, and Moses, and the three wise men, and so on. So painting was really, really important. Michelangelo, of course, painted the Sistine Chapel, and the famous moment where God's fingers reaching down to touch atoms. So these were transcendent. These kind of like movies will be. This is another connection to religion. Is it the churches, mosques, and I've been in mosques, I've been in temples, and the architecture can be somewhat different, but the attempt to promote the possibility of transcendence seems to be a part of any religious architecture that I've seen. The Cathedral of Notre Dame, For instance, the buttressed ceilings that seem to go heavenward, the cool stone, beautiful stone steps, the wooden pews. Everything is, the first thing, it shuts out time as a temporal structure and promotes time as infinite. So sometimes when you walk into a church and the door, big giant heavy door shuts behind you, you can literally feel the switch from oh, it's 2:15, I better get my dry cleaning before they close, to wait, there's time, there's no such thing as time, we're all, there's infinity, and there's mortality, and there are all these people before me, and there'll be all these people after me, and so what do I think of all that? And then you're in you've stepped out of modernity into a respite, I suppose, where you can pray and meditate, go to confession in the Catholic faith, and traditions in Islam, like praying in the direction of Mecca at certain times of the day. That's a way to just produce that, just touch that for a moment, then you get up and go to your Zoom class, and so on. Punctuate your day with reminders that, yeah, this is a temporal secular world, and I'm a part of it, and that's not all. So there are different ways of attempting transcendence in the middle of the day. And of course, advertising takes advantage of that, particularly with the soda commercials. So, have a Coke, join the Pepsi generation, and then they'll show somebody drinking, and they're really trying to depict it as praying toward Mecca, or stepping in to see into the stained glass windows to say a prayer. It's like the soda, the taste of the soda, the fact of the soda is presented as giving you a sacred pause, and a communal pause. But that's just the advertising. It's just soda. It's just carbonated water. There's nothing sacred about it. It's the way it's advertised. And even the slogan, Coke is it, is actually, in the Old Testament, God is, at one point, says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. I have no beginning and I have no end. And this is often, you have to substitute your own knowledge of a higher being, a Yahweh or Allah, whatever it might be. But one thing that the Almighty God tends to embody is no beginning and no end. And so the slogan of Coke is it. So Coke is it. What's it? Coke. What's Coke? It. The Alpha and the Omega. No beginning, no end. And it's a circle. And it's depicted as a circle, this slogan of Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola is actually saying that it's God. Coke is it. I am the one true God, the Alpha and the Omega. I have no beginning and I have no end. But the can of Coke in your hand is not saying, you're not being told the can of Coke in your hand is God. You're holding God in your hand. What you're saying is Coke is it, and you're holding some of it. So drinking a Coke is like going to communion, or whatever your equivalent ritual might be, where you participate in the transcendent by buying your Coke. And of course, every Coke is the same as every other Coke. So you're drinking the same Coca-Cola as Taylor Swift, or Justin Bieber, or Trump, who apparently likes Diet Pepsi. And it's the same can. You can't buy a better can of Coca-Cola than Jeff Bezos. He can buy the whole damn company, and he's still gonna have the same can of Coke that you have. And so that makes it feel communal, and that's one of the ways that mass production can also promote transcendence, because millions and millions of the same thing are produced, and your iPhone 6 is the same as everyone else's iPhone 6. And that's why moving up to an iPhone 7 or 8, or I guess soon maybe 12, feels like a miracle, or like your faith has gone up a notch somehow. And Apple's stores, with their not stained glass windows, but they tend to be made out of glass, and they often have the ones at the flagship stores, at least the ones in New York and elsewhere that I've seen, have a cathedral-like atmosphere, but it's not quiet. It's a cathedral to modernity. I mean, there's the genius. There's people who walk right up to you with their little walkie-talkies or whatever they have, and they punch buttons and tell you how long the wait will be, and it's incredibly efficient. But I always feel like I've stepped into the cogs of a machine, and I'm just moved along, holding my poor little laptop, which has somehow lost faith with the internet. Um, so, uh, and the hotel in this movie called the Atlantic, it's super busy and kind of noisy, and it's a hub. That's so is things like the department store, but it's a hub of modernity, opposite of a church, and yet it's still trying to achieve transcendence, and make people feel special, if they have money. And that's going to be the great joke of the movie, if you want to call it that. That once the doorman has humiliated as he possibly can be, once the village people too have rejected him because he was unworthy of the uniform they want to continue to worship, and they felt betrayed by him because he wasn't the uniform and he was a fake and a fraud, and that means that he tricked them in that they were looking at a symbol of transcendence that wasn't transcendent. So they hate him. They would respond to a uniform again. I mean, the Nazis were very big on uniforms. The stormtroopers and the SS had stunning uniforms, leather and very imposing, and they spent enormous time having those uniforms designed. So Moreno couldn't have known that exactly, but he does kind of predict it, that the German people are lost. They're desperate for an authority figure, and authority figures wear uniforms, and they become authority figures. So he's, in a way, Murnau's warning us that this devastated culture without leadership is going to respond to whatever authority figure can wear the uniform. And it won't matter that Hitler lied all the time and that he eventually, killed 6 million innocent people in concentration camps. That they thought he had the uniform. They didn't think about who Hitler was. The uniform was enough. The spectacle was enough. The spectacle is really important in modernity because it hides the rhizomatic. It's the new way to hide the rhizomatic. Nobody saw what Hitler was doing behind the scenes. We haven't seen a whole lot of what Trump's doing behind the scenes, and even the spectacle at halftime. It's great, and I've got no complaint about it. But a lot of people who are struggling, they might have lost a job, and they do get to enjoy the Super Bowl, and I don't begrudge that for a moment. But what I'm saying is it's compensation for a deprivation that it can't repair. And it's the same with the movies. They offer compensation, like a love movie, Hollywood romance, can reassure you that love is possible, whether you're falling in love, or going through a painful breakup. The Hollywood romance is a recognizable genre because it shows the problems of love, and then it shows usually the two people who work it out. Like they have a misunderstanding, they almost never see each other again, and then somehow something happens. Whether it's Sleepless in Seattle, I'm not sure what. The Notebook, I suppose. I'm trying to think of movies you guys might know. Sometimes they're kind of played for laughs, but it's like Pretty Woman, which is kind of a classic, so you might know that. But really, what they're saying is true love transcends modernity, and most of us believe that. Matthew Arnold that's kind of the first Hollywood romance, when he turns to that woman and says, love, let us be true to one another for the world out there. And you see that in romance. The lovers, they bond together in love, and then it doesn't matter that the modern world is so cold. And in fact, Richard Gere's character is a cold financier, and Julia Roberts plays a cold. She has to harden her heart in order to perform as a prostitute. So both of them are frozen, and they only can melt by meeting each other. He stops being a kind of frozen, angry son of a father who deserted, and she stops being the wounded daughter of a mother who kept telling her she was a bum magnet and not any good. That's something I'm getting into in my class this winter, B75 or 6. It's Professor Flynn is listed, and she's going to be helping with the administration of things, but I'm going to tape the lectures. So if you want more lectures from me next winter, A11 or B76. And let me just mention, I'm sure you know it, but U of T has decided to start winter semester a week later. So January 11th, not January 4th. Time is hard to keep track of. It's not clear why time matters as much, but it does still. So I just thought I'd mention that. So you want to notice how the suitcase in that shot is shot like a sacred object, and it's an effect brought about by the lighting. And in a moment, this suitcase will alter the fate of the doormat. He'll be exhausted lifting it down. So in many ways, the cinema has taken place in the modern world of the way we communicate myths, which throughout history have been stories, the history and the beliefs of society to which we belong. And as we saw with PEPSI myths, the myths offers an overarching belief that allows us to be a collective. It's been called the social imaginary. So in order to have a society, you have to imagine that one is possible. Otherwise, you look around downtown Toronto, we're a society, but how would you know it? Everyone's going in 100 different directions, and you get shots like that. But we know we're Canadian, we know we're Torontonian, we know we're University of Toronto, whatever it might be, because there is an imaginary, which doesn't mean it's not true or even that it's an illusion. It's just that we imagine that people also imagine something similar to what we imagine, shared values of some kind. So you can't have a collective without a social imaginary. It doesn't mean we agree on everything. It means we agree on really, really big general things. And different societies have different social imaginaries. And so the PEPSI myths are strong generators, and they sort of provoke and refresh, like Coke, the social imaginary. And in that sense, it's not all bad, especially if, having had this class, you have some idea so you don't feel lesser than, so that the ads don't make you feel like you're not pretty enough or rich enough, or if you know that you don't have to literally internalize their judgment. That a social imaginary can be somewhat reassuring. In any event, so myths are necessary to have a society. That was true of the Greek myths in the past, and it's true of our myths now, because myths are the DNA of stories. And so you can tell a story, but what makes a story resonate is that it connects somehow to a myth. Myths are stories, but they're stories from which other stories come. So you don't change myths that much. But the myth of efficiency would permit some kind of story. And this movie in modern times, they back against the myth of efficiency. They're like, well, there's something inhuman if you take this efficiency too far, because what happens is profit becomes more important than humans. And humans become disposable and anonymous, and they become very, very quarrelsome with each other, and it actually hurts the social imaginary. If you push any part of the myths that uphold the social imaginary too far, you risk ripping the society. That would happen with Nazism. That the collective myth Germans had a special connection to the world, or even that white, blue-eyed people were genetically superior. That became the social imaginary, and it permitted the extermination of millions, well, many million Jews, but not just Jews, any people who were gay, political activists, they all disappeared into the camps. And that's because Hitler managed to shift the social imaginary over into a new zone where the reason Germany is in such bad shape is the white, blue-eyed, blonde-haired people have been tricked and depressed by all these sort of dirty foreigners. So there were lots of connections of the Jews to rats and to vermin and to disease. They were presented like a virus that fed on the body of the nation, and that came as a relief to people who were feeling, depleted, like there was something or someone to blame, and Hitler was very effective at that. And obviously, when you deprive people chronically and at a deep level, you're setting up and we've seen this in the States too, you're setting up, if not civil war, certainly civil strife. People are going to have road rage attacks. They're going to shout at people in Walmart. They're going to maybe even shoot into a crowd, or as we've seen. So unfortunately, this can sometimes suit the authority figures to have, if the people are fighting among themselves, they're easier to govern. And that's why unification at the grassroots level can be a powerful thing when we can manage it, because these authority figures are they're only as strong as we allow them to be, because their power is the aggregate of what it is we bestow upon them. Like if we're the ones who, if we say we want you to do whatever you think's right because we think you're perfect, that can set up a dictator and a monster. And it's tempting because we all wouldn't mind having a all-knowing parent slash God slash politician who loves us and always looks out for us and always knows what's best for us. It's a nice thought. It doesn't. It may exist in the cosmic sense of a God, but it doesn't exist with politicians. There are good politicians. There's terrible politicians, and as Yeats warned us, the worst are full of a passionate intensity, and the best are lacking in conviction. So be careful who your leaders are. There are leaders who want you to give them your power so they can use it over you and anyone else they want. They're not asking for your power so they can look out for you. A good parent does that. A good parent will say, I'm sorry, you can't, you're 13, you can go to a party with high school kids who are going to be 18, 19, and where there's going to be drinking. I'm sorry, you're 13. And they're like, I hate you, you're ruining my life. It's like, I'm sorry. And in fact, you're not ruining their life. You're trying very hard to make sure they don't have a terrible experience. And parents aren't perfect either, obviously, and struggle to know when they can let the independence of the kid push the boundaries, and when they feel like you can't know this, you're 13, but there's too much risk in this situation. So I'll take the heat for saying you can't do it because I love you. But it gets complicated, right? Well, yeah, you do. I hate you. I was like, yep. Well, okay, but I love you. Then the door slams. But that's parenting and growing up. So let's just to give you an example. Myths are mass-produced as incentives to induce mass consumption. So the linkage between mass production and mass consumption is advertising. That's why I'm so obsessed with it, because that's where the rhizomatic is both covered up and revealed in the ad, in the connection between the deprivation of having to work in factories to mass produce and the compensation of being able to go to department stores or Amazon.com and order the products that make us feel better. But it's a loop that doesn't have a whole lot to do with our humanity. It's all economics, and that's why I think we're in more and more in the age of economics, because economics is the new religion. We recover from the deprivations of production by indulging in the compensations of consumption. Just write that sentence, put it on an index card. For instance, a car ad does not simply show the car. In fact, half the time they don't even show the car, but it shows a car in the desert with a mountain range behind it. And the slogan, this is actually a slogan, conquer the wilderness, for a Jeep or something. And such an appeal taps into much more than whether or not we want a car or need a car. It stands in for progress, the pioneer, the work ethic, the ability to drive over any terrain. That becomes a psychological metaphor. This Jeep will get you through a difficult rubble-strewn road, and you can easily see that paralleling, like, I'll get through this rough spot in my relationship with parents or a lover or whatever. My boss, I lost my job, but I'll be all right because I have this Jeep. I mean, you can confuse. Like, I don't have a job right now, but I can drive up Mount Rushmore or something. Therefore, I'll be all right. So again, it isn't necessarily all bad unless you rely on it exclusively, because having a four-wheel drive in itself is not going to get you a new job. But if it helps keep your confidence up so that long enough to have a good interview, then it hasn't been a bad thing. So that it's a lot about balance. But the thing about conquering the wilderness, we know now that conquering the wilderness leads to global warming, whether you think it's an immediate threat or not. There is clearly pollution. So automobiles pollute, and we're part of nature. We're part of the wilderness too, and so this conquer the wilderness makes it seem like we're gods who can that aren't part of the wilderness. But if we conquer the wilderness, we conquer ourselves, because we're all on planet Earth. There are no passengers on planet Earth. Someone has said we're all this here. We don't get to step off the train of planet Earth, if one, at least not yet. And who knows when, and that when we could live on Mars or something. So going to the cinema with its ritualistic genres and plots is like attending a religious activity, although it's more about restoring faith in the social imaginary than in collective faith. But the deprivations overcome in the movies are actually the deprivations we cannot overcome in modern capitalist society, which is why we like to see them overcome in the movies. It's like a mass. For the 2 hours that we're in there seems to be a God who can see that the right thing happens. Star Wars would be certainly a dominant example of this. It's very self-consciously mythic with the Force. There's the bad, dark side of the Force, and there's the good side of the Force. And in the short term, you can get more done with the dark Force. But in the Star Wars myth, the dark force is capitalism and imperialism and the Death Star and blowing up entire planets with a laser beam. And in the short term, capitalism and the dark side seems way more powerful than little Yoda running around, talking weird. But ultimately, the dark side of the force is a corruption of the light side, and we see that what that does to Darth Vader as he becomes more and more machine. So the dark side is also the mechanical, the efficient. Darth Vader does not permit failure. He squeezes his hands together and you're done. And then you're replaced. They just drag your body off, and another doorman pops up. So the spirituality, movies have an almost sacramental capacity to provide the viewer an experience of transcendence, because the genre formula appears to resolve unresolvable problems. And now the last laugh would be called a melodrama, which is the most religious-like of all the genres, because in melodrama you get rewarded for being good and for sacrifice. So the ending that gets tagged onto this movie is deliberately almost ridiculous, because Murnau is pushing back against the idea that melodrama literally solves your problems in the modern world. So some rich guy had just said, "Well, I will give all my wealth into whoever's arms I'm in when I die." And apparently he was in the washroom, this rich guy, and he died in the arms of the washroom attendant who used to be the doorman. So he's now a millionaire, and everyone has to bow to him, and he gets to walk through the doors of the hotel, and the new doorman has to salute him, and he's just transcended everybody and everything, and it's completely unbelievable. But because his melodrama could have ended where he's just helpless and hopeless and stuck in the washroom, but it doesn't. And so typically melodrama shows somebody who kind of gets broken down, but because they basically are good. It's a Wonderful Life is a good example. It's often shown on Christmas. It's a great melodrama directed by Frank Capra, where Jimmy Stewart is a good guy his whole life, and he's just getting hammered again by financiers, and he gets to the point where he just wants to jump off a bridge so his family will at least get the life insurance. And that's when the movie turns around, and it's like, no, goodness just get pushed out of this life. And I'm trying to avoid spoilers, but he realizes his importance, but more importantly, the town appreciates him, and there's a triumph over the cold-hearted manipulations of the banker who wants to take over the little trust loan company that that Jimmy Stewart runs at reasonable rates, because if he gets a monopoly on loans, then he's just going to have, terrible rates that will just change the town and wreck people's lives. So as a genre, the melodrama allows the sacred to emerge from the secular. It allows a miracle to take place, and the miracle doesn't fix anything in the world beyond cinema, not even necessarily in the film itself. The doorman is ground down to suicidal depression by his place in the capitalist order, and he is vaulted to the top by randomly winning a rich man's inheritance. And as he leaves in the final scene, the young doorman salutes him. So just to further, I'm going to trying to draw to a close, but with the withdrawal of transcendental certitude and the resulting shift from soul to self, just to go back to stuff that was even before the midterm, the modern man in the modern world tends to prefer a sign of power to actual power. It prefers a copy, a spectacle to the original. It prefers a representation that makes them feel good to reality. It prefers an appearance that makes them feel better to whatever the essence is behind that appearance. So illusion is sacred, and the truth has become profane in this concept. So the craving for spectacle, halftime at the Super Bowl, is preferred to relationship. Relationship is not spectacle, it's harder, because sacredness is held to be enhanced in proportion as the illusion increases, and even as the truth decreases, especially when it's an inconvenient truth and a difficult truth. So when an authority figure says, I know where all the problems are and I alone can solve them, they move toward illusion and spectacle, but they become much more reassuring than an authority figure that says, this is going to be hard. I'm not going to be able to end COVID by flipping a switch. We've been hearing about Trump's plan, and he's never shown it to anybody. Biden's at least talking about his plan. But when he does, and I'm not saying Biden is the next second coming of Christ either, but he at least has a plan. And he also is modest about it. He says it's going to be really hard. It's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to still be months, and this is how hard it's going to be to produce. This is how hard to distribute. And that's not as fun or reassuring as an authority figure that says, I have a plan, you don't have to hear it, it'll work. I mean, there is no plan right now. COVID's raging. There seems to be virtually no national containment strategy. So the highest degree of illusion comes to the highest degree of sacredness, and the hotel is a spectacle, the uniform is a spectacle, and we get a scene when the rain stops, where he takes off his rain gear, and it's spectacular in every sense of the word. The sun comes out, we see the sun strike his uniform. The movie is actually split in a way. It's almost a parallel editing situation where there's two sets. There is the hotel, and then there is the village, and they seem very different. They're very different. I mean, it feels like you almost go back in time every time he comes through that archway. The village is very modest, and people are hanging out the windows and having a little wedding in a traditional way, and that's deliberate. Renault it's in the same way that in Araby, the boy goes from the street market where everyone's just shouting, and he says, I felt I bore my chalice through a throng of foes, to the Araby Bazaar, which is like the Atlantic Hotel. Well, at least an early version. It's got electric lights, and the boy tries to worship there, and he gets kind of body slammed at the end when he realizes, what am I doing? I thought I was transcending, and now I just got dropped. I saw myself as a creature. I looked up into the dark and saw myself as a creature, like boom, hits the sidewalk. And that's what happens with artificially induced transcendence as a result of a spectacle that feels so uplifting. But if it's fake, if it's an uplifting that's based on illusion and obscuring the truth, it's like a drug again, where you get high and then you crash. That can happen in all kinds of ways, not just from taking a particular drug. So notice that as soon as you get, and the lighting changes when you get the scenes in the village, and people, they look pretty tired, and they're not well lit all the time. And the factory, so a factory is like a site of mass production, and the hotel's like a factory. I mean, all those people who are there, to staying there, have money, and they're consuming at a ferocious rate, and you're shown that regularly. Literally, the doorman will be shown eating like a pound of caviar, like a mountain of caviar at some point. It's just this crazy, excessive, literal consumption of actual food, but and not just any food, but like super expensive food. But you also see the night watchman who's befriended him at its lowest. So the doorman has, and there's some relationship here. He's brought the doorman with him because he's the old guy who paid any attention to him when he was down, and he's shown entering with like, I don't know, except like 10 boxes of ribbons on him. He just looks scared. He has no idea. He's got a beautiful coat on now, and there's a kind of rags to riches, literally. And this will be played up in something like Pretty Woman as well, where Julia Roberts will go shopping, and the first time she does, she gets booted out of the store, and that's that. Probably, I guess, the most iconic scene is when she goes back with all the and finds that lady who humiliated her. And it reminds me of The Revenge of Jean Reese, or The Revenge of Sasha from Good Morning Midnight, because she said, all of a sudden she has all this money, which Sasha never had, which the doorman never had. And we love those movies. Make us feel so good because it doesn't usually happen that way. When we endure microaggressions, or we look in the window of Holt Renfrew and realize that it's a cruel democracy. We can all see these gloves, let's say, on a beautiful mannequin. And lots of us can't afford them. And I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but you notice things like that. Just the way Sasha says, oh my God, if I had that black dress that I saw that I was going to get at a discount, I would have had some confidence because I would have looked better, and Mr. Blank wouldn't have crushed me, or at least that's the way her thinking goes. So the factory is the site of mass production, and then the mall is the site of mass consumption. And each underwrites the other in a continual loop. So work in the factory compensates, is where you try to get the money so you can afford the compensations for the deprivations endured in the factory. The factory is the main production of commodities, but the spectacle is the main production of the social imaginary, and it dictates how to use the commodities as props to perform masculinity and femininity and self-confidence. And the villagers in the above still, which is on your other piece of paper, they make no impression. Now there's men or women or people who are outstanding in any way. And it's the archway in the back that awaits the entrance of the uniform, which is the representative of the spectacle. And all of these nondescript people will take inspiration that they're related to this spectacle, as one might in the Super Bowl, where they sing the national anthem, and it's a big deal, and they have jets flying overhead while they sing it, so everyone can say, well, I may have lost my job, and I could lose my house, and my marriage is in bad shape, and my kid is having a substance abuse problem, but I'm part of this. I'm part of this religion. The problem is those jets are not God. They're not going to look down on you and give you strength to talk to your son and get another job and do all those things that are relational. So the spectacle is a shortcut. It makes it seem like as long as you're part of this spectacle, your relationships will just work out. But it's got nothing to do with it. And we saw the airplane in Mrs. Dalloway and the expensive car. It didn't help Septimus. Communication is health. Spectacle is a social imaginary that can make us feel part of something larger than ourselves. It makes us feel like our problems will work out, but it's because it's not actually religious. It doesn't give us the strength to work on our relationships. In fact, worse than that, it gives us the illusion that our relationships don't have to be worked on. But everything happens at the relational level. Just like a movie, it happens in the space in between you and the screen. The magic of relationship happens in the space between you and the other person, where you try and see them and don't use them. The vampiric thing is using other people as compensation for your deprivations. So can you get out of that loop? And it's hard because the entire modern economy is based on it, but can you get out of that loop and I think falling in love is if we could define it at all, this is kind of that moment where you're not looking for compensation from the other person for your deprivations, and you each start sharing with the other how exhausting it is to be in a world where everything's compensation deprivation, and then you become a couple and you try and pool your resources, and then one person will listen if you've had a bad day, and you'll listen if they've had a bad day, and then both of you will feel better because neither one of you is trying to just make yourself feel better at the expense of the other, which is what Dorian Gray does all the time. Spends his whole life compensating for his sad childhood. So the doorman's appearance ends every day, and his appearance when he's going back to work begins every morning. So the sun seems to literally set and rise on him and on his appearance in the uniform, but he's not the uniform, and he of course has made that mistake too. A president is not the presidency. It's a mistake that's being made currently, that where a president seems to think he is the presidency, but in fact he was simply a representative of what the presidency means, and his time's up, and the democracy wants someone else to occupy the presidency. But since he can't see the difference, he does. I mean, literally, I don't think he understands that. He's like, I'm the presidency, and so where would I even go? And it's like, well, you leave, and then Biden comes in, and then he's president, and then you've left the presidency, and now you're someone who was president. I'm happy to explain that to him if he wants to give me a call. So with the uniform gone, the doorman will cease to be, because there's nothing that he has. The accumulated results of the economy, indicated by the rise and fall of the inscrutable and divine stock market, keeps track of this generalized sliding of being into having, and then having into appearing. So appearing is not being, having is not being. So first you have to be, and then you appear to have, which is presented as being, but you're twice removed from being. Being is not doing, being is not having, being is not appearing. It is a part of all of those. But if you lose yourself in thinking that you are your appearance, then to be is to be seen, and you're completely at the mercy of the gaze of others. So there's a great shot in the movie where there's multiple eyes staring at him when he's been humiliated, and they know that he doesn't have the uniform anymore, and it crushes him. Live by the sword, die by the sword. If your sense of being adequate is based on how people look at you, that can be easy when people are excited about you, but that means you're also set up to get smashed, like the end of Araby. I mean, for instance, I often get praise for lectures, which I really appreciate, but I try and make sure that I'm not my lectures. I'm not the effect my lectures have. So if my lectures have gone really well, I'm happy, you're happy, you're kind enough to tell me, but that's still not who I am. Because if that happens, and then I give some, as anyone could, some bad lectures, or lectures aren't very interesting, and then suddenly the gaze is hostile, and people are saying Professor Leonard's he's too old, he's not making sense anymore, whatever it might be. And then if I were like this doorman, that would be my uniform, that I'm a good lecturer. And then one day I wouldn't be able to lift the lecture, I wouldn't be able to lift the heavy suitcase, and University of Toronto would make a note of it and say, and then the next day I'd come in to teach my class, and it'd be this new, young, exciting, funny prof. And I don't know that I'm necessarily, love that, but I'll be okay, I think, because I'm not a revolving door here. I have a sense of myself that is more than my lectures, and so it's nice to be praised for the lectures, but I try not to make that a necessary part of my self-esteem and of my self-confidence, because it's getting it mixed up, where I'm now dependent on student evaluations, let's say. And so I feel like a failure if they're bad, and I feel like a god if they're good. That's scary. I mean, I think LeBron James, the great basketball player, said that he appreciates the cheering, but he doesn't take it in because he knows there'll be games. Oh, him, I'm not sure since he plays spectacularly every game. But if he said, if you live by the applause, you'll die by the applause. A very, very good point. And he's a great player. And one part of that, I think, is he just concentrates on his game. And you can applaud it or you can boo it. It's just he's going to do LeBron James and not be pushed this way or that way by your applause or your lack of applause. And obviously other teams might, it's not very sportsmanlike, but they could be mad that he came in and scored 50 points and beat the team. So you don't want to live and die by the gaze of others. Dorian Gray really does that. He uses people, but he's trying to live in the gaze of when they love him, and when they don't, he discards them like a burnt out light bulb and finds somebody else. But he's in a very fragile position, and it finally catches up with him that he has no idea who he is. He has nothing inside him telling him that he's any good. All he has is these gazes that he keeps using up and discarding. So people are, again, like a drug, and he's going to go through withdrawal when it's not working anymore. And for him, Lord Henry says that you're going to go into withdrawal as you get older. So he doesn't change, but he gets tired of the painting and wants to change that. So the compensation deprivation, and I have a thing in my thing I posted for you about Air Jordans and what sacred objects these sneakers are and how much they are attempting to compensate for if you can buy a pair. But these activities produce a further self-alienation that increases discontent. If your object is to feel better in yourself because you bought an Air Jordan, there's nothing wrong with buying an Air Jordan necessarily. And of course, there is the rhizomatic that these sometimes are made in sweatshops and other places where people are being exploited. But even put that aside, the commodity, like the movie, never shows evidence of its own apparatus. It doesn't show what produced it, because that would take away the sacred allure. If somebody being paid 28 cents an hour was standing next to the pair of Air Jordans that you wanted to buy at Foot Locker, that'd be a really different experience than having a salesman say, yeah, here's the new Air Jordans. So commodities act like they were born out of the air, are just miracles that just came from heaven. I've been in Nike stores where they literally put a picture in there. The spotlight on the Nikes makes them look like a chalice, or whatever sacred objects might be in a faith that they're very carefully lit. And objects are sacred because they are both the object they are. A chalice is just a cup, but it's positioned in such a way that it represents a god. And it's the same with the uniform of the doorman. Like, it's just a jacket. But like an Air Jordan, it's heavily ornamentalized because that supposedly connects it to the transcendent. But neither Air Jordan nor that uniform has any connection. It's like there is no transcendent God. It seems that way, and that's why spectacle it operates like religion, but it's not religion because there is no actual spiritual dimension that it invites you to explore. So the problem is consuming creates a self-alienation that can increase discontent, but that makes the modern subject a more reliable consumer because you consume again and again and again, and you'll never reach a limit on the amount of commodities that you buy, because it's not the thing bought that bestows a temporary feeling of transcendence. It's the act of buying it. You all know that feeling, I think, of going to the mall and you get pretty excited and you find the thing you want and you bring it home, and it loses a certain enchantment. Once you own it, once you have it, it can't be the anticipatory object anymore, we don't have it yet. Like one of my kids was talking about an Oculus Rift or something, some kind of immersive headgear, which I can't say I'm very keen on, but it's another story. And I mean, they have me around to keep telling them, but I can. When they were younger as well, they're like, that toy will complete me. It's like, no, I don't. I'll get you the toy, but it's a toy. It's not going to complete you. I guarantee it. In fact, lots of times we try not to buy toys because I could literally see them in the corner as an unused piece of plastic within a month. So I would try and find at least some. I mean, if they were desperate for toys, like Tickle Me Elmo or something, then I'll do it. But I know it's going to be tossed in the corner, and sometimes I like to get them like a rock collection or a jigsaw puzzle even, or something that has a certain interactivity, even a board game. Those get discarded after a while too. But well, chess. If anyone's watching the Queen's Gambit, good lord, I watched the first episode of that with my 14-year-old, and I had no idea about the story. And I no spoilers, but she's an orphan, and it was like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, the way they were handing out tranquilizers, and then they weren't, and then kids were withdrawing. I was horrified. My poor 14-year-old is like, I don't want to watch this. I want to watch it. I don't want to watch this. I want to watch it. And he's fascinated. I didn't know. I was like, you don't have to watch it. He goes, I don't want to watch it, but I do. I was like, oh my lord. So we paused and we fast forwarded once or twice, and then went back. And I was like, man, is this the right thing? He's 14. I don't know. No, but he wanted to. I was very clear, like, we don't have to do this. But he was just freaking out because this girl, at least in the first episode, she's 9, but still, I think a 14-year-old was seeing that struggle with independence and fears of abandonment, and discovering a talent out of nowhere that she's got this incredible ability at chess, and then getting the affirmation from people, first the janitor, and then the local high school guy who runs the chess club. All right, no more than that. I'm getting into spoiler country. So I got to move to a conclusion. I don't even know how long this tape of mine is going. Obviously, there's a fast forward button too, but pay attention to. Okay, I'm just gonna. Sorry, I really got to go down to my kind of final comments. They're all here, and it's a 69-page document. But don't worry, it probably, in terms of how much I wrote, it's probably 9 or 10 pages. But I did it in between. All of the stills. So in the final shot, as he puts the uniform, well, I should say the final scene is when he goes back with the uniform, and he's kind of accepting his fate and just allowing himself to become a non-person. It's very kind of tragic and slow motion. He gives the uniform back to the night watchman to put back in the closet. And this would be the natural end of the film, that he's finally broken. And it wouldn't be unlike the end of Good Morning Midnight, where Sasha invites the guy next door, even though he's been kind of a creep. And the night watchman puts his jacket around him. So it's in a moment of desperate lowness. And this is what my sense of the end of Good Morning Midnight is. As weird as it is to let the guy next door to come spend the night with you, she's at such a low point that she needs. It's the only thing that's going to keep her connected to humanity, and maybe be a starting point for the next day. That's not the only way to read the ending. It's where I tend to lean a little bit optimistically. She could also be, moving toward a suicidal depression. And if the movie ended here, we'd wonder the same thing about the doorman. Is he kind of accepting his humanity? In which case, the good news, he'll have to learn to not care so much what the villagers think. So next time when he goes home and they're like, ha ha ha, you're such a big fraud, he can just, it's not going to be fun, but he can just be like, yeah, whatever, I get it, I disappointed you, I was a transcendent symbol in your life, and then I turned out to be just a person, just like you, just like I am now. Sorry I disappointed you, but I don't have to go jump off a building because of that. You're playing a role here too. And that's not a bad way to push back if you're feeling shamed or humiliated by something. Like, sorry I disappointed your needs, but I'm still a person here, so you can stop shaming me, and maybe we can talk about this a different way. So this would be the natural end of the film, and the title card would come up and tell us that, and then add, but the title card says this is the end, obviously, but this is too upsetting. And this is where Murnau is making a comment on film, on movies, like, this is an entertainment. I made you a movie of what it's really like in the Weimar Republic right now. but this movie needs to sell. This movie needs to bring people into the theater, and we're all depressed. And so he's too much of an artist to try and sell the ending. In fact, it gets cartoonish, and I think that's deliberate. It's not shot like the rest of the movie. There's even lighting. He's not using the lighting anymore. There's the sense of dread lifts, but it's too much. It's obviously a fairy tale. So he says, a title card says it will make up a new ending that will be uplifting. And in this way, the director is drawing attention to the commercial function of cinema and agreeing to its dictate that problems unsolvable in the real world get solved in the world of film, which for the duration of watching the movie is uplifting. But that does mean the movie's another kind of commodity that offers compensation for people who are deprived. And that's another reason movies became dominant, unlike theater, because they were so cheap. The working, the audiences of early film were overwhelmingly working class, and movies what was seen as a suspect cheap art form by the middle class, upper middle class, and certainly the wealthy class who didn't go to movies at all. They went to theater and they went to opera, and actors who had to go to make their money in film would often not want to be credited because they were trying to make a living in the theater, and the movies were seen as really vulgar. So a theater artist didn't want to get, and that slowly changed until being a movie star that gave you huge power, and they could then go to a theater production, and you'd be able to afford it because you're a movie star. Movies were a nickel. That meant that people who worked in laundries and people who worked, in menial jobs where they barely could put food on the table, but they still had a nickel. So they could afford a compensatory experience, and they flocked to the movies, and they built Hollywood. Hollywood was built on nickels, and they never could go near a theater. Theaters were, 20, 30 times the price of a movie. And of course, the movie people could afford that because they weren't staging a live production where they had to pay people every night to go do the same production again. They did the production once, they filmed it. A lot of the actors in the early days just got hourly wages. They weren't stars. There was no star system. They didn't have agents. They were just people who got $100 for the day or less. Chaplin was the first person who began to realize that people wanted to see his movies, Chaplin movies, and he began to demand more money, and he got it because he was right. You could say that there was a new comedy at the movie theater, and people would say, okay, you could say there's a new Chaplin comedy, and there'd be a line around the block. And so Chaplin figured out, I deserve a taste of that. It can't just all go to the studios. So unlike a typical Hollywood movie, the director Murnau breaks the fourth wall and makes sure that the audience knows that it is a formula, even as he then gives it to you. And the subsequent scenes are exaggerated and cartoonish, and they center around excessive consumption of goods, of clothing, of food. Almost a premonition of the way the zombie movies. And, it's funny how genres, horror movies and romance movies are not as different as they sound. Except in the horror, everything goes wrong. Like the romance of the man and the woman in Get Out, that recent movie. They're in love supposedly, and that is a nightmarish relationship, and he doesn't realize it. And in fact, it's not a relationship at all. But she's seducing him to bring him to her family home where horrible things are going to happen. I'm avoiding a spoiler. So that could have been a romance if in fact, if the family had been nice, you could totally change that genre, and they would have been like, wow, this is so exciting, and let's plan the wedding. And it would have been a romance. But she, in fact, was leading him to having his organs harvested, basically. So that was a bit of a spoiler, but you'll have to figure out how that even happens. Okay, I got to stop. I'm sorry if this has gone on a little longer. One advantage of tape is you're not all sitting out there, saying, when is this guy going to shut up? I got to go eat or something. You can pause, watch 20 minutes, do something else. So that's my apology, I suppose. I will be here Wednesday, 11 to 12, doing my usual thing. Okay, I hope you're having a good day, and I'll see you on Wednesday.